On April 6, 1984, Cameroon experienced a dramatic and bloody attempted coup d'etat against President Paul Biya, who had taken power just 2 years earlier following the resignation of founding President Amadou Ahidjo. The coup was orchestrated by elements of the Republican Guard, largely composed of soldiers from the northern region and loyal to Ahidjo. Early that morning, mutinous soldiers launched a surprise attack on the presidential palace in Yaoundé, aiming to capture and overthrow Biya and restore northern dominance in politics. The insurgents briefly seized control of the national radio, falsely announcing that Biya had been removed. However, Biya had evaded capture and quickly rallied loyal military forces. Heavy fighting broke out across the capital, and within 48 hours, the coup was crushed. The aftermath was brutal. Dozens of officers were executed and hundreds were arrested. The Republican Guard was disbanded, and Biya restructured the military to ensure loyalty. The failed coup marked a turning point in Cameroon's history. It strengthened Biya's hold on power, intensified regional and ethnic divisions, and ushered in a period of increased authoritarianism and repression. Since then, Biya has ruled Cameroon with an iron grip, becoming one of Africa's longest-serving leaders. On the 26th of July 2025, the Cameroon election body, called ELECAM, released the names of candidates for this year's presidential election, and Paul Biya, at 92 years, will be vying for his 8th mandate. To put how long Biya has been president into perspective, the United States of America since then has had 8 presidents, the UK, 10 prime ministers, and Nigeria, its neighboring country, has had 11 presidents. Today, at 92 years old, Paul Biya is the oldest and second longest serving president in the world, holding Cameroon in his palms for 42 years. The big question is why? Why has one man decided to hold on to power for so long, and how has Cameroon been under his leadership? This is a story of greed, corruption, and manipulation. This is the story of Paul Biya, the man who has captured Cameroon for over 4 decades. Paul Barthélemy Biya Bimvondo was born on February 13, 1933, in Mvomeka, a small village in the southern region of Cameroon. He hails from the Beti ethnic group, one of the dominant ethnicities in the central and southern parts of the country. Born to a catechist father, Biya was raised in a strict Catholic household, which emphasized education, discipline, and religious values. These foundations would later shape his demeanor and approach to leadership. Biya's early education began at local mission schools. When he was 16 years old, his father, being a catechist, wanted him to be a reverend father, so he sent him to a seminary. Unfortunately, Biya was kicked out due to misconduct. When he left the seminary, he focused on his education. He was later on recognized for his academic excellence, which earned scholarships that enabled him to pursue higher education in France, the colonial power that governed Cameroon at the time. After studying political science and law in prestigious French institutions, including the Lycée Louis-le-Grand, Sciences Po, and the Institut des Hautes Études d'Outre-mer, Biya returned to a newly independent Cameroon, which had just gained freedom from French colonial rule in 1960. At that time, Cameroon was under the leadership of President Amadou Ahidjo, who was consolidating power after reunification of the formerly separate French and British territories. Biya entered the civil service as part of a new generation of technocrats trained in Europe, whose role was to build the administrative machinery of a young nation. He was quickly noticed for his competence, discretion, and loyalty. In the 1960s, he served in various government roles, including working closely with the Ministry of National Education and the Presidency. Ahidjo, a shrewd leader, valued capable administrators who could help stabilize his regime. Biya's French education and his low-profile personality made him a perfect fit for the centralized government that Ahidjo was establishing. Over time, Biya earned Ahidjo's trust, becoming a key figure behind the scenes. By 1968, Biya was appointed Secretary General at the presidency. a powerful position responsible for coordinating the executive branch and managing the daily functions of government. This role placed Biya in the heart of political power and gave him direct access to President Ahidjo. Unlike many politicians of the era, Biya was known for avoiding public attention, preferring to wield influence quietly and efficiently. During this period, Cameroon was consolidating its political system as a one-party state under the Cameroon National Union, CNU. Political opposition was suppressed and power was concentrated in the hands of Ahidjo and his inner circle. Biya's administrative skills helped maintain the stability of the government apparatus and ensured effective coordination among ministers and provincial administrators. His loyalty to Ahidjo remained unshaken, and his quiet competence earned him respect. In a regime often marked by political intrigue and factional rivalry, Biya was seen as a reliable technocrat who did not seek the limelight but worked behind the scenes. On June 30th, 1975, Paul Biya's political trajectory took a significant leap when President Ahidjo appointed him Prime Minister. This was the first time the position existed since the 1961 reunification of British and French Cameroons. The appointment was notable because Biya came from the south, an area traditionally marginalized compared to the northern elites who dominated the government. As Prime Minister, Biya was responsible for implementing government policies and managing the day-to-day affairs of the state. His tenure was characterized by loyalty to Ahidjo's vision and close cooperation with the president. Though the Prime Minister was formally the second highest ranking official, the real power remained firmly in Ahidjo's hands. Biya's appointment was also a strategic move by Ahidjo to balance regional and ethnic interests in Cameroon, which had long been a source of tension. The South, home to Biya and many Christian populations, had felt excluded from the political elite dominated by the Muslim and Fulani populations of the North. Biya's rise was therefore a symbolic gesture toward inclusivity, although it did not immediately translate into a shift in power dynamics. In June 1979, a new law designated the Prime Minister as the President's constitutional successor. Thus, if something were to happen to Ahidjo, Biya would succeed him as President. The defining moment of Biya's life and career came in November 1982, when President Ahmadou Ahidjo unexpectedly announced his resignation for health reasons. This decision stunned the nation and much of the international community. Many assumed that Ahidjo would continue to wield influence behind the scenes, especially as he remained the head of the ruling party, the Cameroon National Union, CNU. As Prime Minister, Paul Biya was constitutionally next in line to succeed Ahidjo. He was sworn in as president on November 6, 1982, marking the first peaceful transition of power in independent Cameroon. At 49 years old, Biya was one of the youngest leaders in Africa at the time. He was young, charismatic, and people loved him. Initially, Biya presented himself as a moderate reformer, committed to maintaining stability and continuing the development policies of his predecessor. He promised transparency, discipline, and renewal in governance, aiming to reduce corruption and inefficiency. After Biya became president, Ahidjo initially remained head of the ruling Cameroon National Union, CNU/UNC. Biya was brought into the CNU Central Committee and Political Bureau and was elected as the vice president of the CNU. On November 11, 1982, he was placed in charge of managing party affairs in Ahidjo's absence. During the first months after Biya's succession, he continued to show loyalty to Ahidjo, and Ahidjo continued to show support for Biya, but in 1983, a deep rift developed between the two. Ahidjo went into exile in France, and from there, he publicly accused Biya of abuse of power and paranoia about plots against him. After Ahidjo resigned as CNU leader, Biya took the helm of the party at an extraordinary session of the CNU party held on 14 September 1983. Biya's attempts to assert his authority by reshuffling government posts and purging Ahidjo loyalists were met with resistance, which developed into something that almost changed the trajectory of the country. The attempted coup d'état of April 6, 1984, remains one of the most significant political crises in Cameroon's post-independence history. It marked a major turning point in President Paul Biya's early rule and exposed deep cracks within the country's military and ethnic power dynamics. The origins of the coup trace back to Biya's succession to power in 1982 after the unexpected resignation of Cameroon's first president, Ahmadou Ahidjo. Although Biya, a southerner from the Beti ethnic group, ascended constitutionally as prime minister, tensions soon emerged between him and Ahidjo, a northerner and Muslim from the Fulani ethnic group who had ruled with iron control since independence. Initially, Ahidjo hoped to maintain significant influence behind the scenes by retaining leadership of the ruling party, the Cameroon National Union, CNU. However, as Biya began asserting independence by reshuffling government positions and reducing Ahidjo's allies' influence, the relationship quickly deteriorated. By 1983, the rift had become public, with accusations flying between the two camps. Ahidjo resigned from the party leadership and went into exile in France, but many of his loyalists, particularly in the elite presidential guard, dominated by northern officers, remained within the security apparatus. This created an unstable environment of mistrust and competing loyalties within the armed forces. Fearing a possible power grab, Biya made a decisive move in early 1984 by ordering the transfer of northern troops out of the presidential guard and replacing them with soldiers more loyal to him, mostly from the south. This order was interpreted by the northern officers as an attempt to marginalize them and solidify ethnic control of the presidency. In response, elements of the disaffected presidential guard launched a coup attempt on April 6, 1984, in Yaoundé, the capital. The coup plotters attacked key locations in the capital, including the presidential palace, Unity Palace, radio stations, and military bases. Their goal was to seize Biya, declare a new leadership, and restore northern dominance. However, their plans were foiled largely because President Biya had been tipped off about the brewing unrest. He was quickly moved to a safe location and was able to communicate with loyalist forces to mount a counterattack. The loyal troops, especially from the army and gendarmerie, rallied around Biya and crushed the insurrection within 2 days of intense fighting in Yaoundé. In the aftermath, the government declared martial law, imposed curfews, and launched mass arrests. Over 1,000 people were detained, and at least 35 were executed by firing squad after summary trials. Several others received life sentences or long prison terms. Although Biya blamed the coup on Ahidjo, who denied involvement from exile, the incident gave Biya the justification to consolidate power further. He purged the military and civil service of perceived northern loyalists and restructured the presidential guard to ensure ethnic and personal loyalty. The failure of the 1984 coup solidified Paul Biya's grip on power, marked the decline of northern political influence, and ushered in a more centralized, authoritarian style of governance that has endured for decades. Paul Biya came to power on November 6, 1982, after the surprise resignation of Ahmadou Ahidjo, Cameroon's first president. Initially seen as soft-spoken and moderate, Biya was welcomed by many Cameroonians and international observers as a refreshing departure from Ahidjo's authoritarianism. He launched a campaign for rigor and moralization of public life, promising good governance, anti-corruption, and more openness in leadership. Throughout the 1980s, Biya ruled under a one-party system where opposition was suppressed and elections were largely ceremonial. His re-election in 1984 and again in 1988 came without serious competition. However, the political landscape began to shift in the early 1990s due to growing internal unrest, economic crisis, and global pressure for democratization following the end of the Cold War. Massive protests erupted in Cameroon between 1990 and 1992, particularly in the Anglophone regions and urban centers, demanding political reform and the return to multi-party democracy. Faced with mounting pressure, Biya reluctantly legalized multi-party politics in 1990 and introduced limited political reforms. That same year, John Fru Ndi of the Social Democratic Front, SDF, emerged as a leading opposition figure, particularly in the Anglophone Northwest and Southwest regions. In 1992, Biya held Cameroon's first multi-party presidential election. Though the election was marred by allegations of fraud and voter suppression, Biya was declared the winner, with just 40% of the vote, narrowly defeating Fru Ndi. Although many believed Fru Ndi had won, Biya was still installed as the president. This election marked a turning point in Biya's strategy. Rather than fully embracing democracy, he sought to maintain the appearance of electoral competition while ensuring his dominance through manipulation of state resources, the judiciary, and the Electoral Commission. From the mid-1990s onward, Biya focused on constitutional engineering to extend his rule. In 1996, a new constitution was adopted, introducing a bicameral parliament, regional councils, and recognizing the country as a decentralized unitary state. However, these provisions were only partially implemented, and true decentralization has remained minimal. A constitutional amendment was also passed, allowing 2 7-year presidential terms. Biya was re-elected in 1997 and again in 2004, both times in elections criticized for irregularities and lack of transparency. After being re-elected in 2004, Biya was barred by a 2-term limit in the 1996 Constitution from running for president again in 2011. However, he sought to revise this to allow him to run again. In his 2008 New Year's message, Biya expressed support for revising the Constitution, saying that it was undemocratic to limit the people's choice. The proposed removal of term limits was among the grievances expressed during violent protests in late February 2008. Nevertheless, on the 10th of April 2008, the National Assembly voted to change the Constitution to remove term limits. Given the RDPC's control of the National Assembly, the change was overwhelmingly approved, with 157 votes in favor and 5 opposed. The 15 deputies of the SDF chose to boycott the vote in protest. The change also provided for the president to enjoy immunity from prosecution for his actions as president after leaving office. During these years, Cameroon's economy saw mixed results. While some infrastructure projects, foreign investment, and oil revenues improved certain macroeconomic indicators, widespread corruption, mismanagement, and lack of inclusive development kept the majority of the population in poverty. Cameroon ranked poorly on international corruption indexes, and key sectors like healthcare, education, and job creation suffered. Biya himself developed a reputation for absentee leadership, spending extended periods abroad, especially in Geneva, while delegating authority to a close-knit circle of loyalists. One of the most serious challenges Biya has faced in recent years is the Anglophone crisis, which began in 2016. Initially triggered by protests from English-speaking lawyers and teachers over marginalization and lack of representation, the situation escalated into an armed separatist insurgency. The government's harsh military crackdown, including arrests, internet blackouts, and reported human rights abuses, led to the formation of self-declared Ambazonian militias fighting for an independent state. Biya has maintained a hardline stance, refusing dialogue with separatists while deploying the military to suppress the rebellion, which has claimed thousands of lives and displaced hundreds of thousands. At the same time, Biya's rule has also faced threats from Boko Haram in the far north region. Since 2014, the Islamist extremist group has carried out bombings, kidnappings, and raids in northern Cameroon. While Cameroonian forces, in cooperation with regional partners, have pushed back Boko Haram, the conflict has placed additional strain on the military and national resources. In 2018, Biya won re-election at the age of 85, securing a 7th term in an election widely dismissed by opposition groups and international observers as fraudulent. The political environment was tightly controlled, and key opposition figures like Maurice Kamto, who claimed victory, were arrested and detained for months. Despite international pressure, Biya's government continued to stifle dissent, censor the press, and restrict political freedoms. Paul Biya, now in his 90s, remains largely absent from public life, and governance is increasingly centralized around a small inner circle. Speculation about succession and internal power struggles within the CPDM have intensified, as there is no clear successor or transition plan. Biya's health and age have become national concerns, yet he continues to govern a deeply polarized nation with unresolved crises. In summary, Paul Biya's rule since 1982 has been characterized by longevity, strategic political control, and institutional dominance. From a technocrat groomed under French colonial and post-independence systems, Biya transformed into a master of political survival. He has managed to outmaneuver rivals, suppress opposition, and manipulate legal frameworks to extend his tenure. However, his long rule has come at the cost of democratic development, national unity, and social cohesion. As Cameroon faces mounting security, economic, and political challenges, Biya's legacy remains controversial, seen by some as a stabilizing figure, but by many more as an enduring symbol of authoritarian stagnation and missed opportunities. Many Cameroonians want President Paul Biya out of power because they believe his prolonged rule has brought more harm than good to the country. Having served as head of state since 1982, Biya has been in power for over 4 decades, making him one of the longest-serving presidents in the world. His extended tenure is widely viewed by the public as a symbol of stagnation, authoritarianism, and national decline. One of the most pressing concerns is the lack of democratic governance under Biya's regime. Despite the introduction of multi-party politics in the 1990s, elections in Cameroon are frequently marred by accusations of fraud, voter intimidation, and manipulation. Opposition candidates are routinely harassed, jailed, or sidelined, and the state apparatus, including the judiciary, electoral commission, and security forces, remains under Biya's tight control. This has created a climate of fear and helplessness, where citizens feel their voices and votes no longer matter. Another major reason for the demand for Biya's departure is rampant corruption and mismanagement. Cameroon consistently ranks among the most corrupt countries in the world, according to Transparency International. Public institutions are plagued by embezzlement, nepotism, and inefficiency, which has stifled economic growth and widened inequality. Many Cameroonians live in poverty, lacking access to quality healthcare, education, and infrastructure, while political elites enjoy lavish lifestyles and impunity. Under Biya's rule, the gap between the rich and poor has widened, and young people especially see no future in a system that rewards loyalty over competence. The Anglophone crisis is another central reason why many want Biya to step down. Starting in 2016, a peaceful protests by lawyers and teachers in the English-speaking regions over marginalization quickly turned into a full-blown armed conflict after the government responded with violent crackdowns. Biya's refusal to engage in meaningful dialogue or propose genuine decentralization has worsened the conflict, leading to thousands of deaths, displacement of civilians, burning of villages, and human rights abuses. Many Cameroonians blame Biya for failing to address the root causes of the crisis and for militarizing a political problem that could have been resolved through negotiation and reforms. In addition, Biya's absence and aloofness from day-to-day national issues have led to growing frustration. He often governs from abroad, especially from luxury hotels in Switzerland, and rarely makes public appearances or addresses the nation. This perceived detachment makes citizens feel abandoned, especially during times of crisis such as natural disasters, national emergencies, or civil unrest. The lack of leadership visibility and accountability further erodes public trust in his government. Lastly, the issue of generational change is central. Over 75% of Cameroonians are under the age of 35, yet they are ruled by a man in his 90s who many see as out of touch with modern realities. The youth, struggling with unemployment, poor education, and repression, want a chance to shape their future under a more dynamic, inclusive, and visionary leadership. Biya became a naturalized citizen of France when he studied there, but he later relinquished his French citizenship when he returned to Cameroon to serve in government positions. In 1961, he married Jeanne-Irene Biya, who did not have any children, though she adopted Frank Biya, who had been born in 1971 from a relationship between Biya and Jeanne-Irene's niece. Jeanne-Irene Biya died on 29th of July 1992 after a short illness, while Paul Biya was attending a conference abroad. Rumors have it that she and several people close to her did not die of natural causes. Paul Biya married Chantal Vigoureau, who is 36 years his junior, on 23rd April 1994, and has 2 more children with her, Paul Jr. and Brenda Biya. Brenda Biya, who is also a LGBTQ activist, publicly revealed her same-sex relationship with Brazilian model Lyons Valença on 5th July 2024. Despite his long presidency, Biya is rarely seen publicly with his family and often spends extended periods abroad, especially in Switzerland, further fueling public curiosity about his personal life. In conclusion, Paul Biya's reign as president of Cameroon, spanning over 4 decades, is marked by a complex legacy of political longevity, authoritarian control, and national controversy. While he brought relative stability in the early years and maintained Cameroon's international alliances, his tenure has been overshadowed by corruption, democratic decline, economic stagnation, and deepening social divisions, especially the unresolved Anglophone crisis. Many view his rule as one that prioritized power retention over national progress. As one of Africa's longest-serving leaders, Biya's presidency symbolizes both the endurance of post-colonial leadership and the urgent need for democratic renewal and generational change in Cameroon. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notification so you don't miss any of our videos. See you on our next one.